wanted to try this, talking to myself in the car as I'm heading to the beach to go windsurfing. I got my IQ foil kit, and I fell out of practice because the weather here hasn't been that great lately. There's been a lot of afternoon storms right when I get out of work, and I really don't want to get hit by lightning. And so it's really been at least a few weeks since I've been going out all the time on IQ foil, because I got it back in April and it's June now, and I was going out like 3, 4, or 5 times a week on it just to get used to it and to learn to ride it and everything like that. I'm not that experienced with a windsurfer. I've only been back at it since June last year, or maybe July last year. I'm not entirely sure. I would have to go back and check. But I learned when I lived in a different place, and when I was doing it before, I had never really gotten planing completely, never gotten in both foot straps, and then I dropped it for a few years, so I started over, but I still knew the basics. I could still, do really low speed tacks and jibes and everything like that. And then last fall, I want to say September, October time frame, I actually got planing for the first time, and also started foiling and getting to where I could kind of control like the slingshot foil. But this race foil feels really good and stable and chop, but most of the times I'm practicing, it's near where I live, because I can just leave work and be there in about 10-15 minutes, which is very convenient for me. But due to the amount of swells there, they reflect off of a seawall when you launch, and then there's a lot of swells due to the wind direction. It just builds and builds, and I think the land gets a little bit shallower there underwater, so it causes a lot of just random swells even when you get away from the seawall. And so it makes for pretty tough conditions, and I didn't appreciate how tough this was. I thought I just really, really sucked, and maybe I do, but that was particularly difficult location to really start trying things. Well, anyways, slingshot foil, I learned to ride it out there on flatter days, and now I'm learning to ride IQ foil. I would have been out more recently, but I actually broke the masts, and that was warranted without question. I think there was at least at one point I noticed there was a vertical, maybe a 1 centimeter cut in that spiral wraps part of the mast right above the boom, and I think that must have been a weakness. At first I thought it was just superficial, but it looked like it wasn't, because the boom just rotated. I came off of foil somehow. I'm still not entirely sure what caused that crash, but I came off the foil somehow, and I probably would have recovered actually, but my weight shifted forward because I dropped so quickly, and when my weight went back on the boom rotated because the mast had just broken, and I got rescued by a fellow IQ foil owner, which is pretty hilarious, all things considered, because he happened to be there watching a sailing group and had a motorboat at the time. But what I'm working on is just getting more comfortable and trying to complete that first foil jibe. I mean, I can do that slogging around, low speed stuff, and I'm getting more comfortable with it, but you need that constant practice to stay in that comfort zone. At least I do. And part of the problem with that, I think, is just my intimidation factor. It's a bit scary to be out there and to go fast on a foil and to be above the water. And I think that fear is just something that it'll go with time, and I'll get more used to it and not be so fearful. And one of the things that's causing that fear, or is related to that fear with why I'm not better than I am right now, is I'm not riding the foil high enough. And other people have pointed this out when I share videos that are familiar with this. They can hear the board slapping against the water. And that's because I'm keeping a really low ride height, because I have a hard time telling how high I am above the water. If I go and rise up slowly, of course, I can start feeling that drift sideways when you get, almost like you get a spin out when you're windsurfing on a fin. You can start feeling that spin out and then push the nose down, and then stay foiling and stay below that maximum height you can really ride on the foil. But other times I get those spooky crashes where I call them spooky because I just don't know what happened. I don't know why I just suddenly drop down, and maybe I'll put a video here to explain what I'm talking about, where I'm foiling, and I thought I had it in control, and all of a sudden it's like the floor just drops out from underneath me. And the overfoils were like, it hit a gust and it just rips me out of the water, foil and everything comes out of the water. If I just hang on, most of the time those aren't that bad, and I stay on the board and I don't go crashing. But these ones,
that was good.
Someone thinks it might be like the foil's getting ventilated suddenly, or there's something weird going on. There's flow separation on the foil. Maybe that's true, I don't know. But it's like you're cruising along and the floor just falls out from beneath me. So I don't know what causes that. Overall, when I crashed, I think that has something to do with when I broke my mast. That has something to do with my intimidation, just because I know that equipment can fail. But in that case, when it did break, it was the best possible situation because I was so close to shore, and someone was there to rescue me, and they were familiar with the kit I was on. And he actually told me he had broken 2 masts of the IQ foil kit, so I thought that was pretty interesting. So I'm not the only people out there breaking masts, but he said they're warranted, and they warranted it. And in my case, mine was warranted. But that intimidation of the mast is there. But what's frustrating about it is that day that I broke my mast, it was almost a perfect kind of wind conditions to practice jives. I was getting really, really close, and it was enough wind that I had more power and more speed going downwind without being super overpowered. Because that's another problem with my sailing location close to home, is because of the shape of it's close to downtown, so it's because of the shape of the buildings nearby and the land, it tends to, I guess, squeeze the air there and cause more of a gusty high wind situation. So everywhere else it'll be, 15, 16, 17, 18 knots in the middle of the bay. But near me, it'll be gusting, over 20 knots. And I know this kit is capable of it, even on the 9.0 with a full cambered sail, if you know what you're doing. But when it starts to get in that unsteady wind higher than 20 knots, it gets to be quite intimidating, quite difficult for me to control. Because it's one thing if it was constantly at speed, but I'll cross these crazy wind lines, and I guess I'll show another video here, but I'll cross these crazy wind lines and I'll come up to them, and just suddenly the wind will just not only pick up 5 to 10 knots on that wind line, and they're visible, but it'll also change direction a bit, so it's really hard to react to. It's really hard to predict what's going to happen. And so we're like, wow, 20 knots, why are you out on a race foil? Why aren't you just regular windsurfing? Well, one, I want to race. I want to race on IQ foil. Whether or not that's going to happen in time, that I'm actually making some jibes in time for a race at the end of the year, that's to be determined. We'll see. I hope so. I should be. Well, I hope so. But I don't know. But why not on a windsurf? Well, I want to practice on a foil. I want to get rid of that intimidation. I want to learn how to foil jibe. I've actually never fully completed a planing jibe all the way through. I've done planing entries and survived and stayed on the board, but I haven't maintained the speed. And the time on the water I get with a race foil kit with a 9.0 sail, when the wind isn't that great here usually, is amazing. I can go out way more often on that same kit, so I'm getting way more comfortable on that kit than windsurfing. And the other thing is, when I launch close to home, there are a lot of wind shadows. So if I take out my blast, which is 145 liters, I have to slog it quite a while before I get to where the wind really picks up. And even when a meter right there says it's like 20 something knots, I have to go, an eighth or a quarter of a mile out for the launch to feel it. And that kind of sucks. I mean, I can do it, but that kind of sucks. And then by the time I get out there, the swell is, a foot or two, which isn't the most comfortable to be out on a board like that. I would really want like a smaller board, I would think. And slogging my other option is a dyno, but it kind of sucks to slog that one in the weird chop there that far out. I'll do it in a Gulf where the waves are more consistent in one direction, but out there it's not so consistent, and there is more motorboat traffic, so it's really kind of borderline doable. I've done it, but I'm just not as comfortable unless the wind's really going, and I can be on something small like my 5.8 or my 5.0 sail instead of like a 6.6. But yeah, that's why I'm sticking to the IQ foil right now. Okay, so that was a difficult but good session. Unfortunately, the wind had died for quite some time, and so there's a lull for like maybe 45 minutes or so where I could have barely gotten going if I just pumped with all my might before it picked back up again and I got flying again. And I sailed for a while, and I was pretty tired, but I felt, cogent. I felt like I could get things going. And then my arms started cramping up, like in my elbow, which is always where I'm just pumping with everything I got. That's the thing that tends to hurt first, is my crook of my elbows. I think it's a remnant of when I used to do rock climbing all the time. I might have stressed those out quite a bit, and so maybe they're old injuries in my elbows. I don't know, but I kept going. So maybe 2 hours or so total, which isn't bad considering I haven't gone the past 2-3 weeks that much. Did a broken mast just for weather reasons. Now, there were actually some younger guys that were really good. This guy and this girl, she was on an 8.0. I think he was on a 9, but he could have been on an 8.0, I'm not sure. But they were pretty young. They were on IQ foil gear, and they were also helping out these kids that were on these tight little slingshot boards, and those kids were pretty fearless, just going for it on the foils and picking up pretty quick. But the kids on the IQ foils were good. I felt better about myself because I don't know how I do, but when the wind was low and I started pumping, I could get going just about the same amount of wind that they could. And I'm pretty sure I weigh more than they do by a decent amount, because I'm 6'1". I weigh probably 185, a little bit more with my gear on me, just depending on how I ate that week. But I was able to go at about the same amount of wind with them, and that made me feel pretty good. But they were killing and just crushing their jibes. I still haven't made a full foiling jibe, and I got so damn close so many times, but it just didn't happen. I had one where I actually overfoiled during the jibe, but I wrote it out, I think. I'll have to go back and make sure I'm not a liar in the video, but I came out, and it wasn't too dramatic when I came back down. I completed the jibe, I think, but I didn't crash. And then there was another time where I was under a lot of pressure because there was a shallow area coming up that I was headed towards, but there's also the clump of all these kids on various, slingshot foils slogging around, and I was coming up on them fast and onto the shoal fast, and I had to time this jibe where I didn't want to get too close to them because they wouldn't appreciate that, and I needed to keep from hitting the shoal. So I went for the jibe, and I ended up almost doing a downwind 360, having never done that before, especially on a foil. But it was funny because I just sheeted in, and I turned really hard, and I turned too quickly, and I just didn't move my feet quick enough to do the jibe, and I just freaked out, and I just kind of held on, and I noticed that, oh wow, I'm almost all the way through, and I'm getting backwinded now, and then I just kind of fell over backwards. It was really a dramatic fall, but it was hilarious to me because I just hadn't intended to do that, and I just made it happen almost. I was actually pretty close to doing it, but it was a good session. I wish that my arms hadn't gotten so crampy. That was when I just decided to come in. I want to keep that from being like too much of a permanent injury. Maybe there's some exercises I can do in the gym to ease that. Maybe some reverse wrist curls and some other things I can do to help those tendons out. And I gave someone a massage, like an arm aid, because she was having difficulties just being a waitress, like holding this tray all the time. She was getting elbow pain, and I loaned it to her, but that was months ago, and I haven't had it back, so I'll have to hound her and see if I can get it back. But decent day. I sailed as much as I could, and had some flying time, had some attempted jibes, and got to compare myself to some really good sailors. So I know still got a long way to go. And I did want to mention there is a new video that just came out, I think yesterday, by Duotone, and it's called, I'm going to try to link it on YouTube here, but it's called How to Go Fast on the Foil, I think. Well, this actually had one of the best tips and the most clear examples of how to better control your height of your foil, and that was, there's this hip motion that you do to you move your hips forward and back to control the altitude of the board. And I just tried that today when I got foiling. I was pretty tired from all the pumping, but when I got up on the board, I just tried this hip motion, and oh man, made a huge difference. And I realized how just complete garbage my stance was before I did that. And the problem was, I think that I had my hips back on the board because, you know, pressure on the back gets you flying, right? But I also had my front leg more straight, and when I tried to push the nose down, if I got too high, I was kind of straightening my front leg and getting this awkward kind of like, almost like a windsurf position where you straighten your front leg and you bend your back leg, which kind of worked. But instead of doing that, I put more bend in both my knees and was pushing my hips forward and back, with them more parallel to the sail, like they show in that, at least I think, from what I could tell, and it felt good anyways, from what I could tell, exactly what they were doing in the video. And I immediately felt better and more in control of the board and then more in control of the altitude. So I highly recommend that video. Check it out. Like I said, it's one of the most helpful things for altitude control that I've seen. Other people have attempted, but that was a very lucid and clear explanation, at least for me.